Hello and welcome back to the Karuna Podcast. I am Ryan Lyddall, the manager of Karuna Coffee House, and today I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Simon Hannington, one of the directors of Karuna Action. How are you today, Simon?
I'm good, very well. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, me too. It's been a while. Sorry about the delay in uploads. Obviously, as you know, we went to the Camino de Santiago, which was lovely. Had a good time.
It was really good.
I was ill, and now we're back to recording again, and hopefully be a bit more regular.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about faith and how it relates to Karuna Action and Karuna Coffee House. So Simon, do you want to just start by giving us a bit of a background of your faith and how it's impacted you throughout your life?
Yeah, so I have been brought up in what you would probably call a fairly charismatic, borderline evangelical Christian household. My siblings all were raised same way as me. We were brought up by a dad who was pastor of a church, and so our faith has really shaped a lot of our outlook on the world, and also our kind of our faith now, certainly my faith, which has changed dramatically since the days when I was part of what used to be the King's Church. Now my faith looks very different, and it's not really part of what I would call a formalized church. But I still very much have things that guide the way I look at the world, the way I respond to things in the world, and how I respond to need, and that's come from my faith in Jesus and the teachings of Jesus.
So you say your relationship with your faith has changed from when you were younger. Have you ever questioned or lost your faith and refound it, or has it been pretty constant? Your view on it has changed, but you've kind of constantly had that faith.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I haven't ever really lost my faith. I've definitely had what I would call dark periods where I've felt completely unconnected to my faith, and that was about 2 or 3 years ago, and I would say I was quite lost at that point. I've come back to a place now where my faith is still very important, and those teachings of Jesus that were foundational to me are still foundational, but also now I'd say they are a guiding light to my journey and my life now. So what about you?
So yeah, I guess my background with faith, when I was younger, I was christened when I was younger. I've had some religious family members, some weren't. So my mum wasn't religious, but wanted me to be christened so I could choose when I was older. I went to a C of E school, so we used to go to church service for like holidays, Christmas and Easter. When I was younger, I think I'd say that I maybe kind of believed in something, some sort of God, but it wasn't very structured. I knew some Bible stories from being in a C of E school, but I'd say it was very disjointed. I remember praying when I was younger, and then I got older and I became a bit more of an agnostic, I'd say. I had doubts about how logical the idea of God could be. And then as I got a bit more older, I became less agnostic and more atheist. I became pretty convinced that there wasn't a God. And I also gained quite a negative view of Christians in particular, but also organised religion, partly because of how structured organised religion and especially the institutions around it have been used, in my view, to like exploit people, exploit vulnerable people, exploit the poor, kind of linked to the state and the capital. And also just I didn't really know many Christians in real life. I knew people who were Christian, but I don't think their faith was a big part of their identity. And a lot of my exposure to Christianity was online, where I saw a strong link between Christianity and like anti-homophobic, anti-homosexual views. So I had a very negative perception of Christianity, which kind of, again, staunched my view of atheism.
So you've talked a lot of past tense. Has that changed at all?
Yeah, a lot. And I very much would say Karuna was kind of fundamental in that changed belief. I still call myself an atheist, but when I first came to the coffee house Karuna, and I just came to have a cup of tea, saw the thing about how it was a charity and there was volunteering, started getting closer to you in particular, and my view was kind of challenged a bit because I was at this place Karuna that was just doing good for the community and doing good internationally, and wasn't very outwardly advertising the fact they were Christians, but it was all a bunch of Christians doing the work. And I spoke to you, and you're not homophobic, and you don't hate gay people. You're actually very pleasant to gay people. And I just suddenly, my view that I saw mainly perceived by negativity online, that Christianity, despite the texts being about peace and love, was actually quite a hateful group. I definitely still do believe there are some people who call themselves Christians who don't practice the teachings of loving your neighbour. You see this a lot online. But we Christians also struggle with those people. Yeah, as I can imagine. But yeah, I'd say that Karuna's definitely challenged my view. I definitely, I was speaking to you a lot more about your view of your faith, and speaking to people like your dad about Bible stories and the teachings of Jesus. I'm someone who now says I don't really believe in a God. I still have issues, generally speaking, with the idea of God and some contradictions I view there. But generally speaking, I also would say that anyone who's trying to live their life by the teachings of Jesus is a good person if they actually do that. I agree with basically everything Jesus said. So my views completely swapped. I think almost in a kind of mirrored way to what I'd think a lot of maybe younger Christians would have growing up, where they're kind of taught to perhaps demonize people who aren't Christian, people who are gay, etc. And they'll go maybe meet some gay people and suddenly be like, oh, gay people aren't that bad. And I feel like I've had kind of the reverse of that, where I've kind of
you've had a lived experience of Christians.
Yeah, lived experience of Christians. And I've realised that the perception I had was wrong. And I definitely would credit Karuna with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your introduction that we have been on the Camino.
Yes.
And that was, I'd say, quite an intense experience for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And for you particularly, you and I had a conversation while we were there, which is the reason for this conversation, because I felt it led to the framing of why Karuna exists.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience
with the Camino and what? Yeah. So when I was, I'd say, out of all of us, the most hesitant and nervous about the Camino generally. I hadn't been on a plane in 7 years before going to the Camino, and I was quite nervous about being away from home for such a long period of time without a way of getting home. So going to London stresses me a bit, but I always know that I can make my way home if I want to. Flying to Spain, being there for 10 days, if I get an anxiety attack or something, I can't just leave. So I was all stressed out, and we got to the airport, we flew to Spain, and I was just kind of miserable. I don't really know why. I was with people who I absolutely love and really enjoy the company of, but in my head I was just like, I can't go home. And then the first day we went out, and I was wearing shorts and a short sleeve t-shirt because we're in Spain and it's hot, and it starts just chucking it down with rain, and I'm freezing, and I'm like, this is terrible, I hate it here, I want to go home. And we leave the first day of walking. I don't really feel like I'm active participant on the first day. I'm very much kind of uncomfortable and only really seeing the negatives, and I can't really appreciate the beauty of where we are. And then my partner was with us as well, Ash, and at the end of the first day, he'd been really struggling. He was a lot more excited about the Camino than I was, but he was really struggling with the physical exhaustion of walking. And he said to me at the end of the first day that he's thinking of going home because he doesn't think he can do the rest of the days of walking. And I was kind of surprised.
It was pretty tough the first day.
The first day, yeah, it was pretty tough. I was kind of surprised because when he said that to me, I'd kind of been wanting to go home all day. But again, flying stresses me out. I didn't think I could actually go to the airport and fly home by myself. That stressed me out as well. So I kind of felt like I was stuck there. And then when Ash says he wants to go home, I'm like, okay. My first initial reaction, which surprised me, was we should just stick it out for one more day. You know, we're already here, we should try sticking it out. And Ash was like, well, if we walk tomorrow, we're going to be further from the airport, it's going to be harder to get back home. And I was kind of thinking, well, at that point, it's like, okay, so I can go home now or I can stay here for like another week. So it kind of felt like an obvious choice for me. You know, I really wanted to stick it out. But if I don't go home with Ash, who's definitely going home, I'm not going to go home early. I have to wait till the end. So we decided to go home. And I felt a bit gutted by myself, disappointed, a bit of shame and embarrassment about the decision. But ultimately, I felt like it was the right choice for me at the time. So me and Ash left. You guys set off on the second day of walking. Me and Ash got a taxi a little bit later, went to the airport, and we flew home. And at that point, I was kind of accepted my decision. I was like, I kind of regret this, but we've already done it now. We're going home. So we flew home, got a taxi to our house. And the taxi ride home was actually really lovely. There was a really nice taxi driver. We had a good conversation, got home, and then went upstairs, sat down, and I was just instantly hit with this feeling of, I don't know, like I just needed to be back in Spain, which is completely overwhelmed and surprised me, because that was completely the opposite of what I'd been thinking for the last 48 hours, which was I need to get out of Spain. I almost had this certainty that I don't want to be here. And it's almost like one of those grass is greener type situations where I idealised the idea of being at home. I got home, confronted with that reality, and I just knew this like profound, deep sense of knowing I need to go back to Spain. So I say to Ash, well, I need to go back to Spain. And he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, we need to go back. We shouldn't be here. This is wrong. And he's like, you're crazy. Why do you want to go back? We've just wasted a bunch of money to get home early. Why would you go back to Spain? And I'm just wrestling with this decision because there's still a part of me that kind of hasn't fully accepted that. But I definitely have this deep knowing that I shouldn't be at home right now. I should be in Spain. I should be finishing the Camino and being with all of you guys who I love and care about. And they're just like a chosen family. And so I start looking into logistics. How do I get to Spain? And again, I didn't book the flights to the Camino. I didn't book the flights home. Someone else organised that for me. I didn't have to worry about accommodation, anything like that. But this time I was having to try and figure it out by myself. How do I get back to Spain? Where am I going to stay when I land in Spain? Because the only flights I could really afford were one of the later ones on Wednesday evening. So I'd have to kind of stay somewhere in Santiago in like an albergue, which also I wasn't excited about the idea of because we were staying in quite nice Airbnbs. So I was going to actually have to stick out in an albergue, then figure out how I was going to get to you. And the logistics of it was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you guys walked. Thursday, you rested. Friday, you walked. So I flew home on the Tuesday. I was going to fly back in Spain on the Wednesday. And instead of going to you guys where you're resting, I wanted to walk on the Thursday just to kind of catch up a little bit on the time that I missed out on. So I ended up booking the flights on Tuesday night. I booked the flights. I hadn't booked an albergue or sorted out how I was going to get to the airport yet. I was like, the flights are the thing that's going to change the price of the mess. So I booked the flights. And I spoke to Jessica, who'd heard I was coming home, and she'd reached out to me to ask if I was okay. And I kind of spoke to her and said, I want to go back to Spain. And she was like, that's amazing. We'll figure out how to make it work. And then a couple of hours later, I messaged Jessica and I say, actually, I'm not going back to Spain. This is too overwhelming. I'm not going to be able to handle the airport. And then a couple of hours after that, I message you and I say, Simon, you're not going to see this message because it's probably like 1:30 in the morning. And later for you, you'll be asleep. But I know I've made a mistake. I need to try and make it right in some way. I need to come back to Spain. Can you help me with the logistics? So then you and Jessica together managed to help me figure out how I was going to do it. And so then it's Wednesday morning and I've packed my bags, and it's weird because I'm not feeling nervous about a little bit. I'm a little bit nervous about the logistics of flying, but nowhere near as nervous as I was for the other flights. And at this point, I'm going to be flying on my own. And yet somehow I just have this profound sense of just knowing this is the right decision. And the confidence that this is the right decision kind of made the nerves kind of feel a lot less bad. And then somehow, speaking to Ash wasn't going to come back with me. And I didn't try to push his direction in one way or the other, but we had a conversation about it, and he decided he wanted to come back as well. And so we flew back to Spain, met up with you guys again, did a bit of walking on our own to get to you. And the experience I had was like a complete 180. The first 2 days, I just didn't want to be there. And then suddenly I was enjoying myself. I felt like I was allowing myself to be part of the group more, and I was just appreciating the beauty of where we were and the opportunity that was presented to us. And in a weird way, I don't think I would have had that appreciation for what we were doing if I hadn't gone home. In a weird way, I had to see that I didn't really need to be at home to really appreciate what we were doing there.
So you had a question for me.
So when we got back to Spain, I asked to speak to you because I just wanted to talk to you because I knew we've spoken a lot about your experiences of your religion and your faith and your understanding of God. And I asked you, what Simon, when God speaks to you, what's that like? What does it sound like? I wanted to hear. So if you're going to give your answer or roughly what your answer was.
So my most straightforward answer is that it can be any way. You know, some people do hear an audible voice, and some people just have an idea, or some people will hear someone else say something to them, or someone will come to them and say, "This is, I believe God is saying this to you." And from my own experience, it's the one moment in my life where I did something that was what I would call led by God, or responding to God saying something to me. Was I was having some dental work done in India, and I was in debt, quite considerable amount of debt. I was due to be married, and I wanted to be debt free by the time I was married, and so I knew that I had to be faithful in my finances, and so I was on a debt management plan, but I very clearly one day heard, or the thought came into my mind of, you need to give all your money away to and put it in the offering basket at church. And I was just like, that's not a Simon thought. Why would I do that? I haven't got the money to give away. I've got debt. I should, if I'm going to do anything, I should pay debt off. And so anyway, from that, I did what I felt was right. And then I jumped on a plane with my father to India, and I told him that what I'd done, and he thought I was a fool because I had no money for this trip as well. Had the trip, and it was a life-changing trip because it exposed me to the projects Karuna's involved with in Delhi through the New Generation Trust. And when I got back, within a week, my debt had been paid. And so from me, it wasn't a booming voice from heaven. It was a thought that wasn't a Simon thought. And so for me, that's my answer to you, is that I really believe that actually it can be just that divine inspiration that you have to pursue with the conviction that you have for that. So like with you in Spain, going home and hating every moment, but then being home knowing I have to go back, that profound sense of, and I think you used the word peace when we were in Spain, of being at peace with that idea of going back to somewhere that gave you anxiety. I really believe that from my own experience, I could say I think that's divine. And so that, I guess in a way, how does that fit with your atheism?
I guess it's interesting. It's it's one of those things where I guess I asked you because I felt like I didn't think this at the time. So when I was at home and I was thinking, so suddenly just hit by this thought, I didn't think anything gaudy about it at all.
Yeah.
I kind of just was too focused on the thought and the logistics of it. And it was when I was kind of on the plane back to Spain, I was kind of thinking, I wonder if someone who had faith would describe the experience that I had as hearing a voice from God or having God speak to them. And I guess I think that I wouldn't say I suddenly converted to Christianity at that moment. That's not how I'd do it. And I think when I asked you the question, I think I tried to make it clear. This isn't me saying to you that I suddenly completely converted overnight, but more of just
I'd
a
hope you, in many ways,
yeah. I think
it was a journey that.
part of the thing for me about, I guess, what I'd say about most of my convictions is that I think that if you're ever completely steadfast in your convictions and unwilling to change them, then they're bad convictions. I think you should always be open to the idea you're wrong. And I think people who are open to the idea of being wrong are more likely to be correct because they're willing to analyze their beliefs. So even though, like I say, I've been quite convinced by atheism for a long time, I felt like, well, this is quite a profound experience, and I definitely need to if I was to just ignore it for convenience to stay with what I already believed, then that wouldn't be holding to my convictions, as I said before. So I still would say at the moment I would call myself an atheist.
Yeah.
I would say that I struggle to kind of explain exactly why my perception changed so quickly, and why I had this clarity. It definitely did feel almost like an out of body influence on me. I guess that if I was to try and justify it from an atheistic perspective, I could probably try and figure out something like just the clarity I got from not having the stress anymore. I was stressing about what was going on, and when I got home, that all left me, and suddenly the regret that was under the surface kind of came out. But I'm not necessarily going to try and explain it from an atheist perspective today, because at the very least, it's nice to be open to the idea it could be something outside my current understanding.
Yeah, I think the thing with faith is faith requires doubt.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's not faith; it's
Yes,
knowledge.
it's just knowledge, and I remember a friend of mine, her name's Rose. She talked to me about someone she knew and saying how she wasn't accusing them of having no faith, but essentially saying, how can that person have faith when they are so incredibly certain that this is what that means, because there's no doubt. And I think when you're dealing with a God who doesn't fit within the logic of atheism, you have to walk this particular journey that you're on with that sense of doubt, that you may never get an answer to what that was, but the possibility that it was divine, also the possibility that there is a rational explanation too, for me is totally fine. Because the truth is, when my debt was paid off, now I know that debt was paid off by someone who knew that I was in debt, and so maybe they already had planned that actually they wanted me to get married at that point, without debt prior to anything else. So, in many respects, you can rationalize, and I can explain away what happened to me in a very human way. But at the same time, I also have to look at it and say, well, what if I hadn't done that? If the stories of the Old Testament and the promises of God are true, often these stories come with God saying, being obedient to my word, and I will give you the desires of your heart, or I will give you the promised land, or I will give you whatever. And so I have this understanding of this God who says, if you do this, then I'll bless you. So if I am understanding my own story, which was that I was obedient to what I believe was the voice of God, then it may not have been paid off. So you have that tussle within that journey of just kind of going, well, there is an explanation, but at the same time, Ryan can't explain that thought, that need to go back, except that maybe there's something external, which ultimately is internal as well. And that's the thing, I said to you at the time, you just pursue that. Don't let anyone tell you what it is, what it isn't. Don't let anyone tell you how to pursue it, but you pursue it. And because as I said to you, my story in terms of hearing God's voice led me to Karuna, and understanding that there's something even deeper within me that was placed on my heart, which was about injustice for the poor. And that's why I do what I do for Karuna, because my heart breaks when I see the poor and the marginalised. You go to somewhere like child promotion school in Uganda, or you go to the slums of Delhi, and you see the way the children live. And yet Delhi is hugely wealthy city, and yet they have some of the most appalling living conditions. And so, there's something in that story that I believe, even in your story of going back to Spain, that I think potentially has the ability to unlock something not just about faith and God, but also has the ability to unlock who you are. Because our earliest conversations around faith, if you remember, you asked me about my faith and how does it affect me, and from my answer to that question was, it shows me who I am. It shows me who I'm made to be, and it's not about rules, but it's actually enhances your life.
It's quite funny because thinking back on some of our earlier conversations about Christianity, I remember you said something to me, and for a very long time I attributed that quote to you, and it wasn't until years later I found out that it was actually something that Jesus had said. I believe it was Jesus. It was said in the Bible, and it was you referring to Karuna and how your faith influences what you did in Karuna. And it was just a lovely phrase that stuck with me this whole time. You referred to Christianity, how it should be, is it should be the yeast in the bread of a community, where you don't necessarily see the yeast, but it helps the bread to rise.
That's right. Yeah.
And that is how Christianity should be within a community. You shouldn't necessarily, I feel like, and what's his name? Dave Andrews, the man who came to visit us. Yeah, who spoke at Karuna. So Dave Andrews is quite a well-known Christian activist.
Yeah.
And he said something about, he was talking about how his group would approach people to help make their lives better. And at some point, someone who he was speaking to asked, well, when do you mention the Christianity? And he said, you mention it at the end if you mention it at all. His aim isn't to go around talking to people who are struggling about Christianity. His aim is to go around and help people who are struggling. And then at the end, if it happens to come up, he might mention that he's a Christian. And so both your initial phrase and listening to Dave Andrews talk made me that I definitely feel like that's how I would view Christianity, but just faith in general, religion in general. And also how I kind of take that to like my work, like the Socialist Party, for example. I feel like there should definitely, going around talking about, I'm a socialist, this is why you should do this, or I'm a Christian, this is, that part goes at the end. Instead, our focus should be on helping people. And then if it happens to come up, you mention that you're a Christian.
Yeah, absolutely.
And which is kind of how I view how Karuna functions. Karuna Coffee House has helped me a lot in my personal life. It's helped a lot of people in our community. And I think most people in the community by now know that there's a Christian affiliation, but it's not something we mentioned to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, we've had some Christians, those ones that we talk about right at the beginning, that have opposed us in the way that we have expressed our compassion and love and our expressed our faith within our community, by being accepting of everyone. And I remember a guy coming in, I wanted to chuck him out. I got very, very angry. And then I thought, this will just give him exactly what he wants. This will give him the rise. He's talking to me from his own Christian perspective, and I'm there going, mate, you don't sound like a loving person at all. You're just telling me that, I'm condemned for accepting, gay people in my shop and loving them just the way I would love anyone else, or trans people, or people who are, I don't know, whatever, really doesn't matter to me. And even this guy is trying to jump on some old-fashioned, boring Christian theology that really doesn't stand up to Scripture, in my view. But in his view, it does. But anyway, long story short, I got quite cross with him, and then I thought, actually, no, I can't give him this, because also I'm not being very loving. So I need to find it within myself to love him, even with his message that I don't agree with. So I took him out the back and started talking to him, and we started to find common ground. It happened to be on the whole Israel-Palestine issue, which surprised me, because most people who have his views on homosexuality tend to oppose me on the Israel-Palestine issue as well. But we hit common ground, and I invited him back, and I said, I'd really like to continue the conversation, because actually I'm learning here in this experience, and I feel like we're having a good conversation. So I think ultimately this kind of faith that I have, and the one that we express from here, is a faith that is loving and accepting of everyone. And it's not about tolerating. There's a lot of this kind of language of tolerance, and we tolerate this. Well, actually, I don't think Christians should tolerate anything. They should love everyone, and God, it says in the Bible that God loves us unconditionally. It doesn't say God loves us unconditionally if we're straight, because ultimately it also says you're made in the image of God. It doesn't put a condition on that either. So from my perspective, this is all about being an expression here in Aldershot and to our partners overseas, showing that God loves the marginalised, the poor, people who are struggling to find work, people who are struggling to find their place in the community. But also it's a place of friendship. The Bible says that Jesus went around doing good and healing the sick. So from my perspective, I'm not terribly good at healing the sick. But if I can follow the other half, which is doing good, then I'll try. I have really, really messed up in the past. And I know I'm not necessarily the best candidate for this job. But I am here, and Karuna is still doing what it's doing, not in my name, but because actually Karuna exists beyond and outside of me. So, yeah.
I think one of the important things about trying to be a good person, and this doesn't necessarily have to be from a religious view, but just generally trying to be a good person, is that if you mess up, if you do bad, if you sin, if you aren't a good person for a while, it's never too late to turn around and try being a good person. And you might never make up for the mistakes of your past, but you can just try your best to be good in other ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that whole
I
kind
think
of
we all fall from the path at some point. It's all about getting back on it.
though, and that whole thing of like condemning me for loving, people on the fringes of our society, you know, kind of holds me in a place there where I sort of can't change, like, and so actually I have to realise that it's that person that's condemning me that needs to change rather than me, because I know I'm not perfect, and people who know me know I'm not perfect, but yeah, so
But it's not about perfection, it's about trying to improve yourself and trying to do good. And I think you shouldn't aim or strive for perfection, because we're humans and humans are fallible. And instead of aiming for perfection, you should just aim to be the best version of yourself you can be that day. And if you just try and do that every day, that'll get you far.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what I wanted to say while you were talking about your conversation with the man is that if you want to kind of link it to the Bible as well, is that Jesus, from what I understand of the Bible, which isn't much, but some, I know it's some, is that he broke bread and he drank with everyone, with prostitutes, with the tax man who took the money, with poor people, with rich people. He didn't discriminate in that way. So in that way, you'd break bread with a gay person, or you'd break bread with a homophobe, because ultimately I think that something else I've said to you is that even though I still would call myself an atheist, is I do believe that the teachings of Jesus are a good thing, and that they're good messages and good stories and a good idea of how to live a good life. And if Jesus he wouldn't discriminate. He'd eat bread with everyone.
So the thing that, one of the reasons why I'm really, really keen on the kind of work that we do at Karuna, particularly in terms of the work that we do overseas, in terms of that kind of what's typically called poverty relief, or aid work, or development work, is that there is a really, really heavy, that's not the right word, like very strong message throughout the whole of the Bible, that talks about God's heart for the poor and the marginalized. And so, if from my perspective, there's a lot of what Jesus teaches, in terms of the tax collector, or, where he's saying, give everything, sell everything and give it to the poor. Follow me, and not these instructions that Jesus gives often is, or the examples that he makes is often of the poor or the marginalized person within the community. He talks about the person who gives the most is the person who gives. It's the woman. He calls it the woman with the widow's mite. It's two coins. That it's the last thing she has, and she gives that. And he makes an example of that because the rich person that gives out of his excess, well, actually, there's not much. He doesn't feel that.
It doesn't really cost him anything.
Yeah. Whereas she gives everything, even though it's tiny. And so, even in his examples and throughout the stories through the Bible, what God is telling us is to not forget the poor. It says somewhere, I'm really bad at referencing, but it says when you give to the poor, you lend to the Lord. It's like if you give to the poor, then you're storing up a blessing for you. Now, you don't give to the poor so that you can receive, but you know that in many respects that there is something of a principle there that you, as Christians, we live by, which is that you want to have God's favor on your life. And, there are certain things that are spelled out in Scripture that tell you how to have God's favor. You don't do it formulaically, for goodness sake, because then you end up trying to create power structures, which is what the church has done. And I'm not saying that of every church. I'm saying that those hateful structures that you talk about, that I also struggle with too. So there's throughout Scripture this message of not forgetting the poor, giving out of sacrifice to the poor. And when you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. And that's the words of Jesus. So when you give to the poor, you're doing something. You're not doing something to the poor person. You're actually doing something for Jesus. And so yeah, it's really important to me, to Karuna, and the reason why we exist. And if it affects people's lives and changes them in a good way, then we've done a good job.
100%.
Yeah. I feel like I've rambled a bit.
Yeah, anything else you want to touch on before we end?
No. I mean, it's Christmas coming up.
That's true.
It's a good time for giving. We have got an appeal, the Karuna Christmas Fund, which is coming up. Well, is now ready.
What is the Christmas Fund? How does it differ to our other funds?
So it's different from our other funds because essentially a lot of our partners overseas like to do something extra, certainly for the kids they work with, whether it's a Christmas party or whether it's giving a gift. We like to enable them to be able to do that for those children, because these kids have such a desperate existence the rest of their life, that just to be able to throw a party at the school that they're in, it's great. It's a nice thing to be able to do. It's not going to change their life, but it's going to give them a nice day. And that's all most of us get from Christmas, is a nice day.
It's nice to just share that with the people who need it most.
Yeah, continue that sentiment and give. It's a time of giving. And so we do encourage our supporters, people watching this, go to karunaaction.org. It's on the homepage.
We'll make sure there's a link to that in the description as well. So Simon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been good, and maybe we'll continue this conversation.
Definitely. And at the very least, we'll try and have more regular uploads soon.
Yeah.
Thank you all for watching. Hope you had a great rest of your day.